Netscape built the browser that created the modern internet, owned more than 90% of the market, and then destroyed itself, not because Microsoft crushed it, but because of one decision it made about its own source code. Everyone remembers the story as Goliath beating David. Microsoft bundled Internet Explorer with Windows, gave it away free, and steamrolled the little guy. That happened, and it hurt, but it is not what killed Netscape. What killed Netscape is that at the exact moment it needed to fight hardest, it took its one working weapon, threw it in the trash, and spent 3 years building a new one from scratch. By the time the replacement was ready, the war was over. This is the story of the single most famous self-inflicted wound in software history, and the engineering lesson buried inside it is one that companies are still ignoring today. First, understand how completely Netscape had won. In 1994, Mark Andreessen and Jim Clark founded the company, and its browser, Netscape Navigator, became the front door to the web almost overnight. Within months, it had the majority of the market, and at its peak, it held more than 90%. In August 1995, Netscape went public. The stock was supposed to open around $28. It hit $75 within the day and closed near $58, valuing a company with barely any profit at around $2.9 billion. That single IPO is widely credited with starting the entire dot-com boom. For a moment, Netscape wasn't a company on the internet. Netscape was the internet, the software nearly every human used to reach the web. And then the most powerful company on earth noticed. Microsoft's response was ruthless and honestly brilliant. It built its own browser, Internet Explorer, and made 2 decisions that Netscape could not answer. First, it gave Internet Explorer away for free forever, while Netscape was still trying to charge for Navigator. Second, and far more deadly, it bundled Internet Explorer directly into Windows. If you bought a computer, Internet Explorer was already there. No download, no choice, no reason to go find anything else. Netscape's entire business had depended on people actively wanting its browser enough to install it. Microsoft made the alternative the default, sitting on the desktop of the 90+% of computers that ran Windows. This is a distribution advantage that no amount of better engineering can overcome by itself, and it triggered the antitrust case that would haunt Microsoft for years. Netscape was in serious trouble, but trouble is survivable. What Netscape did next was not. Here is the moment the company actually died, and it happened inside its own engineering org, not in Redmond. Netscape's browser had grown over 4 fast, brutal years into a large, messy, tangled code base, the kind of software that every successful, rapidly shipped product becomes. The engineers looked at it and did what engineers almost always want to do when they inherit a mess. They decided the old code was garbage, and that the only path forward was to throw it all away and rewrite the browser from scratch. In late 1998, they made it official. They dropped the existing rendering engine, the core code that actually draws web pages, and started over with a brand new one. And this is the number that tells the whole story. Netscape Communicator 4 shipped in June of 1997. The rewritten browser Netscape 6 did not ship until November of 2000. That is nearly 3.5 years in which the company that invented the web browser released no significant new browser at all. There was never even a Netscape 5. It simply did not exist because the thing that was supposed to become it was scrapped mid-flight. Now think about what a rewrite actually means in the middle of a war. For 3.5 years, Netscape's product was frozen. It could not respond to Internet Explorer. It could not add the features users were begging for. Every engineer in the building was pouring effort into a new browser that did not exist yet, while the old one they were still shipping slowly rotted, and Microsoft, with its free, pre-installed, continuously improving browser, simply walked past them. A rewrite is not a pause. In a competitive market, a rewrite is a gift to your enemy. Netscape handed Microsoft 3 years. This is where the famous engineering lesson comes in. And if it is useful to you, subscribe, because taking apart exactly this kind of decision is the entire point of this channel. In the year 2000, a programmer named Joel Spolsky watched this unfold and wrote that rewriting your code from scratch is the single worst strategic mistake that any software company can make. His argument is the part everyone gets wrong about old code. That ugly, messy, tangled code base the Netscape engineers were so eager to throw away was not garbage. It was 3 years of hard-won knowledge. Every weird, seemingly pointless block of code in there was almost certainly a bug fix, a patch for some obscure website that rendered wrong, some edge case discovered only because millions of real people had hit it. When you throw the old code away, you are not deleting a mess. You are deleting every lesson that mess encoded, and you are dooming yourself to rediscover every one of those bugs the hard way. That is why Netscape 6, when it finally arrived, was slow, bloated, and crashed constantly. They had, quite literally, thrown away the map. The end came fast and total. As the rewrite dragged on, Internet Explorer's share climbed past Netscape's, then kept climbing, peaking at over 90%, the mirror image of Netscape's own former dominance, an almost perfect role reversal in about 5 years. Netscape, sensing the end, had already made a desperate, historic move. In early 1998, it released its browser's source code to the public and launched the Mozilla project, essentially open sourcing itself. Then, in late 1998, AOL agreed to buy the whole company in a deal valued at over $4 billion and worth around $10 billion by the time it closed. But the browser was already a corpse. Netscape 6 flopped. Netscape 7 barely registered. By 2006, Netscape's share of the browser market had fallen below 1%, and in 2008 its owners finally pulled the plug and ended support entirely. The company that had once been the Internet was switched off. There is one genuinely beautiful epilogue, though. That open-sourced code, the Mozilla project, did not die. It was reborn years later as Firefox, the browser that would eventually go on to challenge Microsoft and win back a huge chunk of the web. Netscape's rewrite finally paid off, just not for Netscape. So what actually killed Netscape? It is tempting to say Microsoft and Microsoft's free bundle browser was a genuinely lethal weapon. But a company with 90% market share and the most recognized brand on the Internet had time and room to fight. It did not lose because Microsoft was strong. It lost because, in the middle of the fight, it chose to disarm itself for 3 years to rebuild a weapon it already had. The deepest lesson is the one engineers keep having to relearn. The old, ugly code that works is almost always more valuable than the beautiful new code that does not exist yet. Working software is not a mess to be cleaned up. It is an asset made of 1,000 invisible fixes, and throwing it away in a competitive market is not renewal, it is surrender dressed up as progress. Netscape did not get beaten to death. It stopped to rebuild itself in the middle of a knife fight, and by the time it looked up, the fight was already over. Netscape lost the web, and then the company that bought its corpse went on to make an even more expensive version of the same mistake. AOL, which acquired Netscape, would take the #1 position on the entire Internet and set roughly $165 billion on fire trying to defend an architecture that was already obsolete. If you think a 3-year rewrite was a costly bet, wait until you see how AOL blew $165 billion and lost the Internet. That story is on the channel now, and the link is on screen.